Hello everyone and welcome to etellan. For today's video I was really inspired to create another faun after my previous one that I did a couple of videos back now. I noticed the faun that I made was looking really lonely on display, so I thought it would be nice to make another. With that being said, let's get started. To start off this fantasy custom, I'll be using a heavily used Claudine doll from the Monster Hive series. When she came to my care, she was quite dirty and misused and had extremely matted hair. It always feels really nice to restore and customize these kinds of dolls. It's almost as if you're breathing new life into them. I'll be removing the hair first by cutting the fibers at the scalp, then creating an incision at the back of the head to remove the plugs. I know that hair can be removed through the neck hole. This is primarily done by people who reroot dolls. But I like removing hair this way as it not only is quick and efficient, it allows me to clean the final thoroughly. I use second-hand dolls primarily, so cleaning and disinfecting the doll is always important, not only for the customization process, but the longevity of the doll, and my own safety and peace of mind. Though keep in mind, there's no right or wrong way to customizing, and differing techniques is always good. With 100% acetone, I'm able to clean the face and remove the factory paint from the vinyl. Once I do this, I start on the body. The idea for the body design is to create a bowed leg as opposed to a joint structure, the same as the original faun. I cut the legs under the knees with a saw and proceeded to create holes within the legs to support a new bone structure. The bone structure I'll be using is gardening wire. There's nothing more disappointing than when you skimp on the base and get to the end step and the structure just falls apart. It's happened to me, it happens to everyone, but it's always good to just do some extra steps and making sure that the base is as solid as it can be. Using hot glue, I place the wires in the holes. Once it's dry, I develop a muscle structure with the hot glue again, later going over it with a 2-part epoxy to make sure that it's as strong as it can be. I unfortunately lost the footage, but I also made a pair of goat hooves by removing the toes and sculpting with Milliput as well. Before I developed the fur, I blushed the body. I didn't go too crazy with the blushing at this point as I planned on adding tattoos later, so I wanted to make sure that reblushing helps blend the tattoos into the skin and makes it look natural. Once I was confident with the blushing, I sprayed her with a coat of Mr. Super Clear to seal in the blushing and start on the fur. For the fur, I just brushed out some 100% acrylic yarn and worked the fibers into the skin with a small bit of PVA glue. If you've checked out my work previously, you might have recognised this yarn as the same yarn that I used for my Katara doll. This yarn is beautiful and it has varying colours and mixtures, dark, medium and light browns, and it just looks absolutely beautiful once it's brushed out. Putting the yarn onto the body took hours. I think it ended up taking around 2 days, just because you needed to be so precise with where you put yarn so that there's no bold spots and there's no glue leaking through. You have to be so careful and patient when doing these things, but I promise it always pays off in the end. Once I've worked all the way up to the joint in the waist, I'm not sure what you call that bit, I'll be thinning the fur with a sharp razor, and then laying them flat with a damp toothbrush. I like to do this in sections as it keeps it organised, but makes sure that I don't accidentally take off any fur that will leave a bald spot, as especially with dark fur like this, it won't be able to be fixed without glue leaking through. When working on the transition on the tummy, I try to use as thin pieces as possible and apply them with tweezers for precision. Doing this over and over and over with various layers makes sure that the transition is really seamless. I find that the transition section is best done when you apply thin layers over and over and move the hair all the way up the tummy, as it creates a really natural hairline like on your forehead. Once the glue is set and the fur is laid down, I go over once again with the razor just to make sure that I'm trimming some bits that are looking a little bit too long. It's always exciting seeing it come together, and it's such a great feeling. Off camera, I added a sunray design tattoo to her collarbones, arms and tummy. This will be incorporated into her face-up later on. For my doll, I decided on doing a blend of styles, as I imagined her as a traveller who met my previous doll one day. I wanted their styles to be starkly different and yet radiate the same elegance as if they're from the same world. If you saw my Kyoshi doll, you would know that I purchased this fabric for that doll, but I found it would be really nice to use it on my fawn as well. The print I'm using is a Chinese tapestry, though I wanted it to be draped in the style of an African shawl. I wanted it to be as if she was gifted this shawl while on her travels, though still wears it in her cultural style. I love this tapestry as it shows the Chinese landscape but also has various little people in it as well. I think it's really lovely, and I'm quite happy that I was able to actually get it. As this doll will be a fawn, a main characteristic of a fawn is its horns. I created a basic horn design out of Milliput and attached them to the doll's head. I always find it beneficial to wet the Milliput as it's still drying. The roughness of your fingertips adds a nice texture and makes everything nice and uniform. For the base colour, I'll be using Citadel Mournfang Brown as the base for the horns, but I'll later be giving them detail, but that will be once the face-up is done. Once the paint is dry, I'll give her a spray of Mr. Super Clear Matte Varnish, and I begin with the face-up. Using my Albrecht Faber Castell watercolour pencils, I start off with a red to map the shape of the eye. I love using these pencils, they're an absolute obsession whenever I'm doing a face-up. They're so pigmented and easy to use, but I always have to make sure that I put them away and out of reach of my bird. He very much has a tendency to steal, so whenever I'm looking for a pencil that has been left out, it will be under my bed or somewhere around my house. originally had tried to do freckles and such to give the skin texture, but I instead decided to just redo the face entirely, as it didn't fit the aesthetic that I was trying to go for. I get a lot of questions from people asking advice on how to develop their own style and to develop skills, and yet get discouraged when I say that it's practice and learning. I feel like trial and error and being confident in the process of things is the only way you can improve. Your style and the development of techniques don't appear overnight. As they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. For this doll, I drew inspiration from two similar yet very different pieces of media that I really enjoy. I was really inspired by the character design of Forge Master Isaac from the Castlevania animated series, primarily through his design in Season 3. I loved his design and how it reflected the travels and story that was going on with him, without it being obscenely in your face. An example of this is through his face tattoos, which were done in a traditional African tribal style. While they're African in origin, no other African character has been seen with them, so it shows an air of exclusivity, as if they were earned or as if they were from a particular culture that nobody else in the show seems to be from. Another example of this is during his travels he wears an Arabic style riding cape, as it helps him travel through the desert. While he continues to wear the cape, he always makes sure that he's wearing his aristocratic Romanian style underclothes, despite it being a disadvantage in the desert. I imagine that it would be extremely hot. This shows pride in his status within the vampire aristocratic court. For her eyes, I decided to go with a grey glassy eye look, as I wanted them to stand out with the tattoos. By using a Kolinsky Series 7 Winsor Newton brush, I'm able to create small designs in the iris and brighten the whites of the eyes as well. The paint I'll be using is Vallejo White. As well as Isaac, I was super inspired by Marion the Witch's Flower. I love the world that they built within that movie, and the magic of the movie. I imagined that the doll that I'm making would fit perfectly into their magical world. It's character and world design like this that are truly so inspiring to people like me, and for yourself I imagine as well. A character's story should be shown and rarely told, and I wanted to make sure that this is incorporated into my doll. Once I was happy with her face, I gave her a final spray of Mr. Super Clear Matte Varnish and started developing the details of her horns. For this, I'll be doing a basic dry brushing technique with browns, greys and a little bit of white. Having the paint off the brush into a tissue removes all but a tiny little bit of the paint. When this happens, I'm able to scatter a tiny bits of the pigment over the top of the horns. This gives it a weathered effect and makes it look like actual bone. By centering the lighter brushing in the middle of the horns, I'm able to create a slight halo effect that will give the design dimension and stop it from looking flat. The hair was probably my absolute favourite part of the entire doll. I wanted to try and expand my skill sets, so I wanted to attempt at creating protective braids. I first started off by adding loose fibres to the edges of the hairline. I like doing this with all hair when it's pulled back, as it stops the hair looking fake and unnatural when on a doll. This was my first attempt at ever doing this kind of style, so do bear with me on the process. There is definitely things that I would change in the future, but I feel quite happy with how it turned out for a first go. In planning this style, I decided it was easier to keep track of the braids by working layer by layer, gluing, braiding and tying off the braids one by one. I work this all the way to the top of the head. While I could have easily just added yarn and left the hair in its twist state, I felt like it would end up looking just like that, yarn hair. I wanted to push the design, so I wanted to make sure that it was a representation of how the style looks in real life. Protective braids are a hairstyling technique used to protect curly hair. The style stops curls and the ends of hair from getting tangled together by keeping them tightly positioned within a braid or a twist. Doing this not only keeps the hair safe from tangling, it decreases the risk of splitting and damage. While hair braiding has been seen through almost every culture on Earth, protective braids are different, and they serve as an intrinsic part of Black and African culture. Not only is the style unique to their hair type, but some say it symbolises strength and pride and connection to Earth and ancestors. Evidence of this style can even be found dating back 5,000 years, with the discovery of cornrows depicted on a woman within cave paintings in northern Africa. And that's pretty amazing if you ask me. Around 6 hours and various copies later, her hair starts to come together and take shape. I ended up deciding on bringing the side and front pieces around the horns to the back in creating a half updo. I forgot to film it, but I also masked any glue areas that peeked through. I ended up grabbing some gold embroidery thread and wrapped it around the front braids. This unifies all the yellow within the doll's aesthetic. As a final step, I added her hair to her body and glossed her eyes and lips. Once that is dry, she'll be ready for her photos.